we start looking at the BEM execution plan. You should be familiar with the idea of BEM execution plan by now. You have all read all the documents and the standards of PAS 1192 and British Standard 1192. Looking at this particular document here in the PAS 1192 schema. What's the idea? The idea is that BEM execution plans are actually those moments in the workflow of your BEM supported project where a project team responds to an EIR formulated by an owner, formulated by a client. These are actually information that model the aspects of the process that the team is promising to set up if they get awarded the contract. Okay? It's a key document for level 2 building information modeling, we know that. Who fills it in? Well, generally the responsibility of filling this document in lies with somebody that has a lot of relationship in the supply chain, so it will make sense for it to be a general contractor or a designer or somebody that has a number of connections and contractual relationship with others. So it's whoever leads the design and build team. Okay. So we can say that it's a tier 1 leader that does that. What is the purpose of this document? Well, it's an initial document that sets out the ability of a team and the planned response to a team to deliver on the employer information requirement that was set up by a client. Therefore, it naturally evolves. So, as a clarity of relationship between the team and the client evolves, so should the BEM execution plan. And intrinsically, because it's responding to a brief, a BEM execution plan does not necessarily lead to a contract, right? So you are a developer, a designer team. You get in touch with another, with all the stakeholders on your team, consult on an employer information request brief, and see what are the options of you carrying out that required workflows, and bring this into a documentation in a BEM execution plan. Send this plan to a client that might decide to give the contract to somebody else, right? So naturally, the amount of resources that you are prepared to put in this BEM execution plan are limited because you are investing in your ability to deliver on some expectation without knowing whether you will win the contract. Does it make sense? So, to what extent are you prepared to invest in making a really clever and sophisticated BEM execution plan? Well, only limited, only to some limited extent, reasonably, because of course carrying this out to full development would take money and talks and meetings and conversation, right? So you want to develop this in several stages, because this is a complex document that contains all sorts of information associated with the project and the way in which people are going to collaborate. So project scope, description, key stakeholders, personnel, the key performance indicators that we're going to use to evaluate the quality of all of this, how we are actually coming together, what standards are we using in terms of modeling, what type of protocols are we going to agree and use, and so on, units and such. But a lot of information comes at this soft end of the collaborative working that might seem trivial, but actually takes a lot of negotiation to clarify. What is the expertise of your team? Are they actually really physically capable of integrating information seamlessly? Do we have all this custom application? Have we tested the fact that our softwares are capable of interoperating everything amongst themselves, and so on and so forth? So a lot of this takes a lot of negotiation, a lot of work. Does it make sense to carry out all of these fine level of detail at early stages? Maybe not. So what we find ourselves is in a social environment where there is a pre-contract BIM execution plan that then gets revised after the contract is awarded. So only the winning team gets around the table again and clarifies what are all these fine-tuning aspects of a BIM execution plan, and then submits it to the employer to make sure that this is actually still compatible with the idea of them winning the bid, whether it solves all the expectations that the client has. At this stage, it makes sense also to include in your workflows and in your agreements and in your contract some levels of BIM execution planning reviews. So maybe you will see whether the information, the plan that you have put in at this early stage needs some development further down the line. In accordance to PAS 1192, the BIM execution plan will enable the employer to understand what the contractual implications are of the proposition of any team that works for them. Okay, and it allows them to see if there is room for negotiation and improvement on the interaction that is planned to be happening between employer and team. We've already mentioned this need of a review just before signing the final contract. Okay. So there is a kind of a fluctuation time between the time where the client receives all the proposals and the actual signature of a contract, where there is a moment for the clients and the team to review these contents. So these are mandated content that should be in your BIM execution planning document. The scope and BIM related goals, organizational roles, the required and defined staffing levels, the process that is going to happen, what type of information exchange is going to happen throughout the different stages, how do we connect the building information modeling data that we are dealing with at design stage with the transformation that this data needs to undertake before it goes through facility management and operations. So what type of collaboration and what procedures will be needed at edit stages to achieve this? Ideally also information about quality assurance procedures. So how do we make sure that throughout the development of all this massive data set that we know of, we constantly keep an eye on the fact that this is correct data and that we are following a good process that we can also improve on the next iteration of the delivery. Fine details as well as the technology infrastructure requirements. We have seen last week the concept of a common data environment. So how do we set that up? How do we make that happen? And also, how do we break down the models so that that clever classification of different naming convention and breakdown of the system allows you to bring together all these different contributions for different purposes. What deliverables are available at what stage, and also what are the contracts that occur between the client and the team, or maybe the tier one, the main contractor, and also what possible contracts are available between the main contractor and subcontractors. Now, that's a document, okay? That's a Word format document, or any document that would contain all that information. It is now possible to develop some of that through standard templates that are available. You have seen probably last week what is offered by the digital BIM toolkit by the MBS. But a written document will have a hard time to specify all of this information. So together with a BIM, you have a number of appendices that try to make this information much more editable, much more clear, much more flexible, and transparent by using a number of schematic diagrams and representation and annexes and tables and all sorts of documents that make this easy to read from all the stakeholders. Because these are quite crucial bits of information. They are contractually enforced, so getting information wrong in terms of your deadlines or whether you fall in one of these tables or not makes a big difference from the endeavor that any parts of the contractual supply chain needs to consider. So it is important that these are easily read. I hope to be able to go very quickly through this idea once again so that it's finally cemented for everybody. This all starts from the information that the employer wants, given previous experiences of how they want to improve on the process. And then the BIM execution plan is the response of a design team to this. It is supported by an MIDP, which is a Master Information Delivery Plan, that is the sum of all those documents that we've seen that document, that detail who's doing what and when. It is covering all stages or relevant stages of the information, starting from the inception and design of your process up to design and construction. It is defining as well as how the information is expected to grow throughout the different stages. So what are the expected levels of information that we mature as we go on from a stage to the next. And also it mandates and defines what is the contractual information at specific exchange points that are the data drops that we've discussed in the past. 1, 2, 6. I don't know why some people felt the need to define to draw a smiley face here, because this never happens. The client cannot possibly be happy after all that. That's a lot of headaches. So, but ideally that's what we want. So I think it's important to remind ourselves that all of this we're doing because we're expecting to deliver a facility which will be leveraging the knowledge of the whole process for operation, okay? So if you miss this crucial long-term objective, you might as well do a little bit and do some little automation in your office and forget level 2. PAS 1192 Part 2 is at the core of this process because this mandates what the dynamics are of the capital development processes. And again, if you have not read that document, I urge you now to read this tonight. The focus on electronic oriented information is mandated in PAS 1192 Part 2. What we are going to see next is how do we actually enforce a mechanism for all the different players to be able to collaborate in such an environment with try to resolve all the interoperability issues that we might have. So I close this presentation and open the second presentation we're looking at today, which is COBie information exchange and data drops. So we've seen the big picture. We know what the purpose of a BIM execution plan is. Where are we now? We are now here. We have defined a BIM execution plan and a master information delivery plan. And the first step we have to think about is what are we going to do in terms of delivering the first set of information at the first data drop, okay? In this information delivery plan, we are aiming to define, as we said, how the information across time here grows, not only for the graphical model, LOD, as we've seen in the language that the MBS uses, and the non-graphical data, LOI, again in the kind of jargon that the MBS adopts, but also in terms of documentation. What extra document do you need to provide to complete the set of information that comes in LODs and LOI? So the answer is, at these contracted information exchange points, in order to be able to operate a happy life, we are using a specific file format that is compatible with the PAS 1192 standard that is defined in part 4. We need to see this initial data drop as the first step of a progressive, enriched stream of information coming out of the process. We need to define who prepares it and what information needs to be in it. Now the focus is for general briefing information that will contain space planning, site and context, some design strategies, some information about the performance of the building. Because if you are a client and you want to develop your building in the long term, well, that's the moment in time in which you have the greatest opportunity to leverage the design understanding, the technical skill set and the knowledge of your design team to achieve your targets, however complex they might be. If you don't do that at the very early offset of the project, your chances of having those targets achieved are much lower. So what is the performance of your building expected in terms of spaces available to you, site orientation, energy aspects, structural costs and structural reliability, ability maybe to support further growth in the future, flexibility of the spaces, intelligence of the mechanical engineering and plumbing infrastructure. All of these requirements and expectations needs to be set out clearly, and employer information request. And the way in which you're responding to that employer information request needs to be in the data that you make available to the client to see whether his ambitions are achievable and at what cost. Elements, materials and components, construction proposals, health and safety, and generally other information about the processes can be discussed at this level. So we have seen that this is the standard that we are looking at, collaborative production of information part 4, fulfilling employers' information exchange requirements using COBie. So this is the code of practice. This is a document that tells you how you should be using COBie to fulfill the EIRs. So to provide that information that the client expects at different stages. Okay? Is this clear for everybody? So what is the purpose of this document? Well, we say that, but who performs the data drop? So we've seen that the purpose is to give you practical and operational guidance on ways in which you bring together all that information that might be very complex and very articulated on the different components of your buildings and make it available to the client to know whether he's going to be happy to operate a building like that across the life cycle. Who performs the data drops? So who has the responsibility to bring together that information at each stage of the supply chain development? Any answers? Contractor. Contractor is a clever word because what does it mean?
I can also say stakeholder.
Exactly. The contractor is actually somebody who has a contract, right? Which means whoever signed the document saying they will. Okay. In that sense, yes, it's a contractor. Generally, in the British jargon, contractor is actually the person who builds a building. Okay.
That's actually what I mean. Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case. The correct answer is who signs the contract. Whoever agrees to that responsibility in the paperwork, right? In the contract. So yes, it is the contractor, but not necessarily the person who builds the building. Yes.
So in that case, would it be project manager or project coordinator?
It could very well be a project manager, or a project coordinator, or a designer, or anybody. And these can actually change and be defined at different stages. So we can say that at stage 1 it's the lead design, and at stage 4, it's actually the general contractor, the builder. Yeah. So this is to be defined in the master information delivery plan and then carried out. So this document here, part 4, gives you general guidance on how to achieve that. Let's see what they do.
You know how your data drops? So data drops just goes to common data environment.
Yeah.
Be big data drop. Who then brings everything together to provide the information to
Okay, that's part of the master information delivery plan. So there is no formal requirement for that, because the standard expects to leave different teams to play to their strength and use maybe a third party if they want, because they think that that's more efficient, or maybe just trust on some artificial intelligence to do that for them, right? So there is no strict formulation of who should do that, but in your BIM execution plan, you are going to tell the client who is going to take that responsibility, and the client needs to believe that that is feasible and agree to that at the pre-BEP and post-award BEP and sign that off. Yes?
Can I just clarify? Tim, you said the COBie drops go into the common data environment. I thought it was the opposite. It was all the information you had in the common data environment you were exporting to then give to the client.
The client partakes in the common data environment, so you can have a part of your common data environment where the COBie drops also sit. Okay, so different contributions in the common data environment can be actually merged, and that's correct, into the production of a data drop at one specific moment in time that kind of freezes the state of the design at that point into a data drop. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
We are going to use a format for constructions operations of buildings. So it's a format that was born for the purpose of managing buildings, not necessarily for the purpose of designing buildings. Okay? So COBie is a facility management orientated format. Okay? The idea is that to properly operate a building, we need to know how it's been built, and to properly build it, we need to know how it was designed. Sounds reasonable, but we will see that a lot of the information of how it was designed can progressively be dropped out of the content of your format, because you are progressively more interested in actually retaining what a model is rather than what it was at some point before it was built. Okay? Because you're interested in the factual arrangement. Well, you might say that you're interested in the way any design structure came about, because you need to understand how the architect intended it to be, to evaluate, to maybe operate it properly. But not all buildings are like that. And if at some point the architect intended to build it against some particular vision, and then the vision was changed, then you can drop that initial vision that never materialized. To reduce the amount of information that is available to you, to avoid or information overload. Okay, so if there is too much information, you can't find the bits that you're interested in, right? So the ability to narrow down the focus on information that actually needs to be dropped out of COBie is also a potentially very interesting aspect of your master information delivery plan. Yeah. So at design stage, we only contain information about the spaces, the system, the equipment, their layout, and so on. Once we start building stuff, we want information about the products that we use. We want information as the way in which we actually built it rather than how we envisioned it. Tags and serial numbers and documents and warranties associated with the different items, and operational manuals to know what is the file form, the cable form compliance of this projector, because we want to operate this projector. So if we want to replace this at some point in the future, we need to know what kind of cable infrastructure is there to find a compatible one to replace. Does it make sense? So all of this information builds up in a structure that looks like this. Now this sits, this kind of part of the topic sits between construction management and information sciences. Okay, we are looking now at the so-called schema. A schema is a data representation of the knowledge that we want to capture. Yeah, the data that we're interested in, of course, is the building, right? We want knowledge about the building, but we cannot kind of give somebody else our piece of brain that contains that. So we are forced to give them data. Data being non-very intelligent capture of some aspects of the knowledge that we have, right? It's a low-level representation of the high-level concept of a building. So let's see what data is expected to be in this schema. Core information about the facility. What building are we talking about? This might seem redundant because, of course, it's the building that we're building, right? However, you have to consider that this document needs to be dealt with by people that might, like the British government, deal with hundreds of different buildings, so they don't want any confusion. So putting a code on the building, classifying it, giving a unique reference number, giving a clear location, giving it a clear address, is an important aspect of what we need to have so that this information gets managed properly. Okay, this facility. How many stories, how many floors do we have in this facility? How many spaces do we have in each of these floors? Do we have different zones? What components belong to all of these spaces? Components being physical objects, right? Chairs, doors, ventilation systems, and stuff like that. Well, actually, ventilation parts. And then systems are the sum of several components. So my ventilation system is the sum of my fans and the pipes and the control electronics required to actually run the ventilation system. So if one of these components fails, I know that whatever I replace it with, it needs to be compatible with the rest of the components. And if I cannot find any compatibility at the moment, I probably need to replace the whole system. So the schema gives me information about how these systems are made so that I can identify easily what are all the other components that build up that system. Make sense? Now, components might belong to a type. You can clearly see that this table is just the same as this table. They are the same type. This makes our life easy when it comes to maintenance, right? Because I know that that's broken, I need to replace it, and I already have another one in storage somewhere. And I have probably some spares, and I need to know where they are and in what nick they are. And I need to know that if I want to replace them, there are some activities that I need to run on them, and this will take some resources. Does it make sense? So these are the main classes of information that we have in COBie. I should mention that COBie is a spreadsheet format. It's a format that you can actually store in Excel or in any other spreadsheet-like standard application. Does it make sense? You all know what Excel is, right?
Heard about it.
Heard about it. You'll be surprised. Okay.
I'm really in trouble if you don't know what Excel is.
There's people that love Excel. I'm one of the few that really hate Excel. Because I think it's not very. The trouble with Excel is that it allows you to make mistakes, right? So you can, where you are supposed to put a date in, you can put in a text or a smiley face or anything like that, and there is no constraint to the user, right? So no constraint means you're sure that somebody's going to use it or misuse it or something. Yeah. So I'm one of those people that like strong information mechanisms. But Excel is flexible, and everybody can open an Excel file and save it and read it in the future. So it's one of those formats that you can expect to be able to read again in 20 years' time when none of your designers are around for to receive a phone call. So on top of this core information on the building, you have more information about contacts and people and attributes and other extra data that you can attach to this. In terms of structure, you see that there is a spatial hierarchy, so facility, floor, space, zone. These are all information associated with the topology of your building and with the nature of the spaces that you have. There is then an object hierarchy, so there are 3 tables that include information about physical resources, well, physical elements, and then there is a 3rd hierarchy that is associated with the processes that can occur. So maintenance jobs and resources and cost of actually running the business of operating the building. Okay, how many of you have had a look this week at the MBS's digital BIM toolkit? It's always the same for people, 5 people. 6. Okay, you went on. Some people like the web more, so they went online, even if they didn't read the documents. This is the time that you start doing that. Have a look at how the digital BIM toolkit can support the creation of such information and save it on an Excel format. Are we all clear what a COBie file is at this stage? Have you got any questions on a COBie file format?
A rainbow spreadsheet.
It's a rainbow spreadsheet, right? So we can probably say, if you don't have any specific questions, we still have 2-3 minutes. I can say a couple more things about this rainbow that you see here. So beyond the the schema, so the core fields that are defined for the format. I should probably be more precise about what this jargon that I'm using. So each of these blocks is a class, right? It's it's represented as one of your sheets in Excel, right? And it has a number of columns that are defined by the standard. And in one column you have the name of the facility, in another column you have the code for the facility, and in another column you have whatever, some specific fields, such as the creation date of that concept, whoever was the user that created that idea, that record, and so on. So some fields, which are these properties that you can specify, are defined in the file format in a specific color that tells you more about the nature of that field, whether it's a compulsory field, something that you must write in the document, otherwise the format is invalid, or for instance, the purple ones are all columns associated with external references, which are ways in which you can specify that particular component also present in an external database, in another system, in your Revit file, in your facility management document, or so on. The purple fields will give you its ID in another system. So you can connect it to more information that is available about that same table in some other IT system. Okay? Now, confusingly, you see a graphical 3D representation in this slide. The point I want to make now, I want to make clear, is that the COBie format, being an Excel type format, does not include any 3D information about the elements or the building, except its bounding box. A bounding box is the size and the location of the element in a 3D environment. Okay, so the bounding box for this round rubbish bin here would be a box, yeah, that is the minimum size box that can contain this this shape. Okay, so everything is reduced to small boxes, so you know how big they are and what is their place in the building where they are supposed to be. Okay, but there is no other level of geometry. A bounding box is a very simple geometric representation of your items that can be presented with just a few numbers, because we have 3 numbers for the size of the box, yeah, how wide, how deep, and how high it is, and another 3 numbers for the coordinates in the whole building, right? It's at this coordinate system or at this coordinate system. So with 6 numbers, you can roughly say you will find it there, and it's this big, but you will not know what shape it actually is. Does it make sense? So it's the minimum kind of representation of this 3D. The reason that this is here, this slide is here, is because what is expected of COBie is that the Excel spreadsheet actually is the result of an export from your 3D environment. Okay, we are talking about a spreadsheet, but nobody expects that you are going to fill in that spreadsheet manually. Okay, it is an easy and simple file format because we want this. We want make sure that we'll retain the ability to read that file for several years in the future, but not because it's something you need to produce manually. Okay, so this is an important aspect. This slide tells you that you're going to have your 3D designing environment, and you're going to produce that level of extraction from your complex integration of all different components in your common data environment. Okay? You can fill in a COBie file format if you want by hand with Excel, or even with an open source spreadsheet program. But that's not what generally should be said in a master information delivery plan or in a BEP execution plan, because you're never going to win a bid if you go that route. Okay?
It'll take you a few years.
Okay. It's warm in this room, but we managed. Have you got any questions? Let's try to recap. We've seen today the purpose of a BEP execution plan, yeah? And the purpose is?
To respond to the employer's information requirement.
Right, so it's a contractual expectation. The employer's information requirement says what the client wants. The BEP execution plan is the response that several teams put together to allow this person to make a decision. What's the best team? At that point, we're talking of a pre-contractual BEP execution plan. The employer makes the decision. We can now start discussing the fine prints and the details of a BEP execution plan. We finalize it, then we sign a contract. In that contract, we, on top of this pre-contractual BEP, we also define all the aspects of the master information delivery plan, and we say what information are we going to make available for each of the data drops at each stage in the COBie format. But in order to achieve that, we also have to have an internal team understanding of the nature of information exchange throughout all the different internal stages. Forget the client. Maybe the client is happy to receive a single data drop at stage 1 with whatever the state of the design is. But to get to that point, internally, the team needs to know who's doing what and who's giving the required information for the other stakeholders to progress on. Okay? That is everything that we need to inform and include in our finely detailed BEP execution plan and master information delivery plan.